All right, preparing to live stream, so I'll tell you exactly when this thing goes up. All right, welcome to Reason and Theology, everyone. We are joined today by William Albright, our co-host. I'll be filling in for Michael Lofton. He's not with us this evening, but he gives us his regards. We are blessed to be with Allan Ruhl. He is a Catholic apologist. You can find him at allanruhl.com. His blog is called Truth Without Compromise, and he has been in this apologetics business for a while. His YouTube channel, which is also Allan Ruhl's, been up since 2006. He specializes in Islamic apologetics, and he's here joining us today to talk about an article that he wrote. It's entitled Babylon is Rome in 1 Peter 5. So, Allan, welcome.
Well, it's nice being with you guys.
I appreciate you coming on, brother. So why don't you tell us a little bit about how you came to the faith and how you came into apologetics real quick, and then we'll jump into the material.
Oh, well, there's not much to my faith journey. You know, I'm a cradle Catholic up here in Canada. I'm from actually further north. I'm actually born and raised in Edmonton, which is a hometown of Jordan Peterson, if you trust what Wikipedia says. It's my dad is from a Lutheran background. We are Volga Germans. That means we were Germans who lived in Russia on the Volga region. In fact, if you read, I'm sure you guys have read Bishop Athanasius Schneider's book.
Absolutely, yeah.
He talks about us on the first page, actually, because he's also a German from Russia, but he's from a separate colony. And then my mom's family, that's where I get the Catholic from. She's from, her background's from Ukraine. Like, they're both born on the Canadian prairies. They're both from farming families. Awesome. But that's where I get the Catholic from. She's a Uniate Catholic, so her whole family is Ukrainian Catholic. And so I got the Catholic versus the Lutheran, and I'm pretty happy about that. And I went to Catholic school. They sent me to a French Catholic school here in Alberta. I attended church. In 2012, I started to attend the traditional Latin Mass, and I've been attending it ever since. Because of course I grew up in the Novus Ordo, plus we'd also go to the Byzantine rite, because Ukrainian rite. And then, but since 2012, I've been going to the traditional Latin Mass, and I started blogging in 2015. I had been studying apologetics prior to that. I started the idea because I'd watch, James White debate these Catholics, and I'm like, oh, the Catholic is going to say this and just trounce them. Right. But half the time he didn't give the perfect answer. And and so that's the reason I started my blog. Ironically, this topic is one of those things where people like James White, Jerry Walls, right, and many other people have often gotten a freebie, and it's Catholics have been like a deer in the headlights. It's been, it's unfortunate, but
I agree. I've noticed that as well.
Yeah, like they don't know how to answer this, because most Catholics and most Protestants, let's be honest, really don't know church history, and this claim is thrown out there. So to get back to my introduction for a second before.
Yeah.
And so I started my YouTube channel a few years ago. So yeah, you can find me on YouTube. You can find me on my blog, allanruhl.com, where I've been posting regularly for 5 years. You can find me on Twitter at Allan Ruhl. Yeah, and
All right.
on
So,
Facebook if you want to. I'm
right, right,
I'm
yeah,
on social media. So
right. You're all over the place. So we have you on today. By the way, I should tell the audience, I was actually blessed to be on Alan's show about a year ago. I wanted to say, or 8 months ago, 9 months ago, something like that.
yeah, it was October 14th. I remember that
Okay.
because it was the anniversary of the Battle of Hastings. It's a weird way I remember that.
That's good. That's good. Yeah, I was on his show, talking about the papacy and the early patristic period and things like that. So check that out. But in any case, we have him on here to discuss this issue of the Protestant objection to Catholicism that says that because the early church at Rome had many presbyters and not one sole monarchical bishop, the papacy is de facto or ipso facto false, because the doctrine of the papacy, according to Vatican I, says that our Lord Jesus Christ invested a certain primacy of jurisdiction in St. Peter, and that gets inherited by a lineal succession in the Roman bishopric. But with a lot of higher criticism, biblical criticism, historical criticism from the I want to say the late 18th century, but I know it got real famous with a chap whose last name is Lomp. I have a couple of books by him, but he wrote a book on the early Church of Rome, which basically said that, look, the early Church of Rome didn't have one bishop, let alone much less a pope. It was a plurality of elders, plurality of presbyteros, and then eventually later on, due to pragmatic reasons, they said, you know what, we need one guy to kind of facilitate us. So we're going to, elect one of us to be a bishop. And so, not only is the monoepiscopate an invention of the church, however healthy and pragmatic it was, but the papacy especially would be a much later development. So Allan here has written an article called Babylon and Rome in First Peter. And so why don't you hit it off? What is it that drew you to this objection, and how did you begin tackling it?
Well, when I first started to read the Church Fathers back in the day, like I think I started with St. Augustine's Confessions, but then I'm like, hey, people came prior to St. Augustine. You got the Apostolic Fathers who come right after the New Testament. And then, of course, I mentioned a bit earlier, I'd watched some James White debates, and I saw him making this, and then I realized that this was not a fringe position among the more well-learned Protestants. This is used by quite a bit of them. And I'm like James White, we mentioned Jerry Walls. He published a paper on this not that long ago. And I think it's kind of, I don't want to sound dismissive when I say this, but it's a very lazy way of attacking the papacy. It's like, oh, it's not an apostolic see, because like when a Catholic and an Eastern Orthodox debate, they both admit that there was a papacy in the first millennium. It's just a question of how much power they had. So the Catholic will take show episodes of where the Pope had a more universal jurisdiction, and the Orthodox will say, no, it was more of a final court of appeal, something like that. And so this objection really bothered me. Now, the Protestants concede that this has always been viewed, like later on, like post-second century, they've always believed that there have been a succession of bishops, but that was not the case. That was to basically to cover over that there was essentially a college of elders. and we don't really, and it's kind of annoying because it's an assertion that's made without evidence. Really, it's an argument from silence, but at the same time, it's not going away, and it's not a fringe argument either. So we have to address it. I know there was a friend of mine I did pro-life work with, and she had gone to an evangelical college in Calgary here, and she basically was taught that. I asked her if she had been taught that, and she's like, "Oh yeah, like that's." So it's basically amongst all Protestants who learn church history. And a thing that's interesting, this is kind of the first argument I want to use against this, is in the first, let's say, first millennium of the church, there are cases where people challenge the Pope's authority. Like, for example, a famous episode early on is Saint Cyprian and his bishops there in North Africa. You got Saint Firmilian. You got Photius in the 9th century in Eastern Orthodox. They're a huge fan of Photius. You got the Arians in the 4th century challenging the Pope's authority when he's trying to install Athanasius and several other bishops into the Eastern seas. After they'd been expelled, they challenged his authority. And none of them, not one, threw out this argument that they had, well, your see is not apostolic. There's no line of bishops back to Peter. Therefore, you've got no authority beyond the boundaries of the city of Rome. No one made that argument. And all of these people had presumably read Ignatius, read Clement, read the other relevant church documents, but they had not ever made this argument. And but I guess we modern people know better, right? Than all the ancient people. They didn't have iPhones, so they didn't know anything. But yeah, so that's the first argument I want to make against it. There are some Protestants who even challenged the fact that St. Peter was in Rome. And that's the first point I want to establish. The main argument of this, and we're going to build up to it, is kind of the Apostolic Fathers, particularly St. Ignatius, because St. Ignatius writes several letters. And what's interesting, he always addresses the bishop of the city, like to the Magnesians, to the Smyrnians, etc. He always addresses the bishop, but when he writes to Rome, he doesn't mention a bishop. So it's kind of like, whoa, maybe there was no bishop there. They had the College of Elders going. But I think it's best, and if you'd agree, we should maybe start with the proof that Peter was in Rome, specifically starting with the Holy Scripture itself.
Yeah, why don't you if a Protestant were to ask you, where might I look in Scripture for evidence that Peter was at least in Rome?
Sure. And now there's an argument that they make, and I'm going to connect these two. An argument that they make, and it's a clever argument, I'm not going to dismiss it, is that when St. Paul writes to the church in Rome, he mentions several people, a few dozen people, but St. Peter's not mentioned. Now, the later tradition in the church puts St. Peter in Rome. But so, is there a contradiction? We could force a contradiction there, or we could find a way to amalgamate both pieces of evidence. Maybe St. Peter was not in Rome at that time, or he had not left Antioch to go to Rome, because he was in Jerusalem, then he went to Antioch, then Rome. And of course, the Acts of the Apostles in the later half, it follows around Paul. So there's 3 verses in the first epistle of Peter. Now, keep in mind, in the early church and in modern day scholarship, there are people that cast doubt on 2 Peter's authenticity, like Eusebius, and I think a few others say it's spurious. It says Peter on it, but it's not written by Peter. But they all agree that First Peter is from the pen of Peter through a scribe, Silvanus. And so let me take a look at some verses to show that. Let me bring up the article here.
You gonna pull out the NIV on us?
you noticed I quoted that, right? Yeah. So well, keep in mind, I'm writing this for Protestants, so I prefer to
Absolutely.
use I prefer to use their translation.
That's fine. No, hey, look, man, I'm as liberal as they go when it comes to translations for study purposes. Go on.
Okay, so you got in my article that I came out with a couple days ago, Babylon is Rome in 1 Peter 5. We're going to talk about the verse that talks in Babylon, but there's two important verses we have to mention until prior to that. The first is 1 Peter 1:1. He's introducing to the letter. Now, if he's writing to the church in, let's say, the church in Ephesus, it's automatic. He's not in Ephesus, right? And it says he's writing to a group of Christians in Pontus, Galatia, Cappadocia, and Asia, and Bithynia. So he's writing to, this is essentially Asia Minor. Now, this was one of the hotbeds of early Christianity, like in the first century. You had a lot of Christians in the Holy Land, like in Jerusalem and the surrounding area. You get you have a lot of Christians in Asia Minor, and you have a lot of Christians in Rome as well. And of course, there's our smaller communities. But so it's writing to the Christians in Asia Minor, implying he's not in Asia Minor.
Right.
And now he could be in the Holy Land. Okay, that's true. I'm not saying this is concrete. But once we take a look at the second verse, that I'm going to, it tilts more in the direction of him being in Rome. And that's 1 Peter 2:17. It says, show proper respect to everyone, love the family of believers, fear God, and honor the emperor. Now he brings up emperor. The Greek word is basileus. Now this word, it could mean king, but keep in mind, these people are in the Roman Empire, so they're thinking about an emperor all the time. There may have been a few vassal kings out there, but let's face it, in Rome, the big guy is the emperor. The fact that he's got the emperor on his mind, it's kind of implying that he's in the shadow of Mount Doom there, where the emperor is. And keep in mind, emperor, at later history, of course, the emperor's converted, but now they're a huge enemy of the Christians. They're persecuting the Christians at this point. So it seems that way. But then we get to 1 Peter 5:13. This is at the very end of the letter. It says, she who is in Babylon, chosen together with you, send you her greetings, and so does my son Mark. Now, Babylon, what's that? Now, we think of Babylon, we think of the Babylonian Empire in Iraq. But keep in mind, Peter's a Jew who had studied the scriptures, the Torah, the prophets, Psalms. And of course, when you think of Babylon, it's kind of like when, like if someone doesn't like a politician, you'd call them a Nazi or a communist to try to like discredit them. But of course, they're not a member of the Nazi party. They're not a member of the Communist Party. But in this, it's kind of used as a similar smear, referring to Rome. And there is no tradition, at least not that I'm aware of, where St. Peter's in Iraq, where he's in actual Babylon. But there's a lot of tradition says he was in Rome. And we as Catholics interpret scripture through tradition. And now a Protestant does not consider tradition as important, But I mean, it's good to look at this in the eye of tradition because there's no evidence he was in Iraq. And in fact, there's a really good testimony from Eusebius of Caesarea, who is our first early church historian. He's going to come up again in this, by the way. And it says in book 2, chapter 15, and Peter makes mention of Mark in his first epistle, which they say that he wrote in Rome itself, as is indicated by him, when he calls the city by a figure Babylon, as he does in the following words, the church that is at Babylon, elected together with you, salutes you, and so does Marcus, my son. And that's Eusebius in the 4th century. Now we say, well, you know, he wrote this on it kind of ends right prior to the Council of Nicaea starting. And so it's like, oh, 4th century. But keep in mind, though, he had access to more documents than we have now. And although he's writing in the 4th century, he was born in the mid 3rd century. He's writing this at the end of his life. So he's been a Christian for a long time. And he says everything is, sorry, I just had a thing come up on my screen there. Yeah, and so he knows that St. Peter was in Rome. And there's actually, we're going outside the New Testament here. Is everything all right?
Oh, yeah. We can hear you
okay.
loud and clear.
We're going to the church father, Clement of Rome, who lived about 100. He died about 100 AD. That's when he 100, 101, around there. And then he wrote a very long letter to the church in Corinth. And he quotes it in chapter 5. It says in chapter 5, he's trying to give an example of martyrs. Let us take Peter, who because of unjust jealousy endured not 1 or 2, but many hardships. Once he gave his testimony, he went to the place of gloriotum. And then he goes on to give St. Paul as another example. And of course, there's ample evidence that St. Paul was in Rome as well. So the first things that come to his mind, Clement, he's in Rome. The 2 main martyrs there, Peter, Prince of the Apostles, and St. Paul, the final chosen apostle. And there's a footnote here. The scholar is a guy named Kenneth J. Howell.
Yeah, he's a great guy.
He's a great guy. He's a former Protestant too, I believe, former Calvinist, right?
Presbyterian, yep.
Yep. And he says in here, it says, it's no accident that Clement chose Peter and Paul as his examples of endurance and martyrdom. And it says early on, Peter and Paul were viewed as the co-founders of the Church of Rome. St. Irenaeus, the late century Bishop of Lyon, has a long passage in which he recounts Peter and Paul as pillars of the Roman Church. See Against Heresies, Book 3, Chapter 3, Section 2 and 3. It should not be forgotten that St. Irenaeus in his youth knew Polycarp of Smyrna personally. The latter, as Bishop of Smyrna, knew Ignatius of Antioch, who probably knew Peter personally. Thus, there seems to be a direct line from Peter through Ignatius and Polycarp to Irenaeus. Still today, the Church of Rome celebrates the co-founding of the church there by Peter and Paul on June 29th of every year. So you've got the scriptures testifying. You've got the earliest historian of the church, Eusebius, testifying. You've got St. Clement testifying. So I think that's pretty good evidence and pretty good testimony from scripture and tradition that St. Peter was in Rome.
That's interesting. So, I mean, to war against that kind of evidence would take an irregular amount of skepticism, it seems to me.
Yeah, but I mean, the people that are warring against this evidence are not just rejecting evidence on this front. You know, they'll take a look at what St. Ignatius says about the Eucharist in several of his letters and say, oh yeah, it says it's the flesh of Christ, but really it's only a symbol. That's what James White does, you know, like nothing, there's no evidence that's good enough for some people. But for a rational person, and like just a fair analogy, Scripture, an apostolic father, the first historian of the church, and most Protestants would say, not all, but most would say, certainly James White, the papacy wasn't fully developed by then. That's what they would say. They think it comes about the 7th or 8th century, right? But at this point in time, they don't think the papacy's there. Yet there's all this evidence. These supposed non-papacy believers believe that St. Peter was in Rome. Now, of course, that moves on. That's only part of the objection, as you know.
Right.
Their objection includes the fact that sure, and some will say, well, maybe he was in Rome, but he was not the Bishop of Rome.
So Peter, so we can be confident based on these sources, though, that based on 1 Peter 5, and early testimony, that virtually no historian questions in terms of Clement, being from Rome, and we could be pretty confident that Peter made it to Rome somehow, and his body, his person, made it to the environs of the Roman city.
Yeah, and it's interesting, if you go to Rome today, I think in the 1940s they carbon dated what was believed to be the tomb of St. Peter. They carbon dated the bones there. Now, this doesn't necessarily prove it's Peter, but it proved it's from the 1st century. So it's not like something later. Like there's been some problems carbon dating the Shroud of Turin, right? They're like, right, oh, it might come from later on. But there was no problems with this at all.
Huh.
And
hey, I want to get a chance for William to step in here for a second before we move on to the next question, which is, okay, Peter made it to Rome, but what did he do in Rome? William, in your experience, you've been debating Protestants for years and years. You've been reading their works. Have you really seen a serious Protestant scholar question the presence of Peter in Rome?
Well, I have heard serious Protestant scholars bring up a number of arguments. One of them, Allan and yourself would be very familiar with, would be one to hearken to the great Ignatius of Antioch. And as you know very well, Eric and Allan, you frequently hear that in Ignatius of Antioch, for him, Episcopos we never hear of a reigning bishop of Rome. What is going on there? We've got 7 at least authentic letters from Ignatius. We hear of numerous bishops. What is happening there? This plurality of elders, we've been told, is a thing, never a singular ruling bishop. So we clearly have within the early church a model that is diametrically opposed to what would later develop within Roman Catholicism. We frequently hear it being brought up. I do not agree with that. I think that can be completely shattered to bits. But I'd like to pick your brain, perhaps, Allan, and get your thoughts, and even you, Eric. Allan, what can we do if that very argument is presented by an individual? They tell you, well, you know what, Allan, we've got the letter of the Smyrnans, we've got the Magnesians, we have the Philadelphians. Where is this singular ruling bishop, Allan? And where is the Bishop of Rome in Ignatius of Antioch? How can we tackle that objection?
Well, let me just say before I tackle this, this is probably the best of the arguments they have on this topic. It's like St. Ignatius writing to the Roman Church, but not mentioning a single bishop, where he writes to the Ephesians, to the Trollians, you name it. He says he normally mentions the bishop in their respective churches, like in Ephesus, it's Onesimus. In Magnesia, it's Damas. It's Polybius and Trollians, etc. And so this is probably their best argument. And if we can refute this, we can pretty much shred the whole case. But we'll see. Now, why didn't Saint Ignatius mention a bishop? Now, of course, James White, Jerry Walls, and all them will say, well, they didn't have a bishop. They had a college of elders. And a quick response to that is, well, he doesn't address a college of elders either. I mean, it's like, dear elders of the Church of Rome, blah, blah, blah. And he does not address them. So if that's damaging to the no mentioning the bishop, it's equal damaging to the college of elders. Now, but still, there had to have been a reason why St. Ignatius did not bring up the bishop. And the one way that we can find out this for sure is if we ask St. Ignatius. Now, the problem being St. Ignatius has him dead for 1900 years, so we can't ask. Yeah, exactly. He's a lost witness in this case. Now, and we have no church father or early historian explaining why he didn't mention a bishop. So no Ignatius, no testimony of Ignatius's friends, no testimony of the church fathers. So we have to use our logic here. And I think the answer is taking a look at the other letters, his other 6 letters that William alluded to. And I'm going to be quoting from his letters from an article I wrote. What's the date on this article? It's not too long ago.
Allan, can you, I apologize for interrupting. Can you also maybe plug that blog where you wrote the article on, and maybe people can go and check it out?
Yeah, in fact, in these last few months, or these last 6 weeks, this actually started with the whole Cameron Bertuzzi saying he's interested in Catholicism. And so, of course, James White and Jerry Walls have gone after him. It's on the 15th of August, Feast of the Assumption. It's called Refuting James White's Favorite Argument Against the Papacy. And this is the first of several articles I've written, the most recent one being a few days ago, the one that Eric brought up, the Babylon is Rome and in 1 Peter. And so, yeah, if you go to it's called Refuting James White's Fave Argument Against the Papacy, and it tackles this head on. And it's a fairly long article because I throw in a lot of quotes. I don't normally write articles that long, but like I really want to cross all my T's and dot all my I's. And I think Sam Shamoon shared it on his Facebook.
Yeah.
So let's take a look. First, we're going to go to our good friend Eusebius again. In Book 3, Chapter 5, Eusebius writes, as to the rest of his followers, Paul testifies that Crescens was sent to Gaul, but Linus, whom he mentions in the second epistle of Timothy, 2 Timothy 4:21, as his companion at Rome, was Peter's successor in the episcopate of the church there. So again, you have not only Eusebius testifying that there is a bishop in Rome, because if Peter was a bishop and Linus was a bishop, they'd presumably keep having bishops. And but again, 4th century, let's go to Ignatius. Now, when we read the 6 other letters of Ignatius, there's something interesting. Okay, I may have to hop to another article here.
Yeah, I have different versions of the letters of Ignatius, but I have in hand here the ones Penguin Classic, Apostolic Fathers.
Yeah, that's a good one. I got that one. I got a few editions. I got the one with the companion volume to the one edited by Kenneth Howell there.
Yeah,
And
I would go to if our listeners want to get good translation of Clement of Rome to Corinth and Ignatius's letters, definitely pick up Kenneth Howell's translations.
Those
all
are
right.
pretty good.
So there's two huge arguments I want to make here. The first one is his attitude toward monarchical bishops. So I've read the passage from Eusebius. Now I'm going to start to read some of St. Ignatius's quotes in his other 6 letters. He says this to the church in Ephesus, chapter 4, wherefore it is fitting that you should run together in accordance with the will of your bishop, which thing also you do, for your justly renowned presbytery worthy of God is fitted as exactly to the bishop as the strings are the harp. So he's talking about the ecclesiology of these churches and how important it is. Let's go to his epistle to the Magnesians, chapter 6. I exhort you to study to do all things with a divine harmony while your bishop presides in the place of God. Let's pause there. In the place of God. I would think that's pretty important to St. Ignatius.
Oh, yeah.
If it stands in the place of God. And your presbyters, I continue, and your presbyters in the place of the assembly of the apostles, along with your deacons who are most dear to me and are entrusted with the memory of Jesus Christ. Let's go back to the Magnesians. He's talking about the epistle to the Magnesians, chapter 13. Be subject to the bishop and to one another, as Jesus Christ to the Father, according to the flesh, and the apostles of Christ, and to the Father, and to the Spirit. And so there may be a union, both fleshly and spiritual. All right, let's look at his epistle to the Trollians. I'm sure I'm pronouncing that wrong, but chapter 3. In like manner, let all reverence the deacons as an appointment of Jesus Christ, and the bishop as Jesus Christ, who is the Son of the Father, and the presbyters as the Sanhedrim of God and the assembly of the apostles. All right, let's look at the epistle to the Philadelphians, chapter 4. Take heed then to have but one Eucharist, for there is one flesh of our Lord Jesus Christ, and one cup of the unity of his blood, one altar, as there is one bishop, along with the presbytery and the deacons. So one altar. And by the way, this, although it's not the topic of the show, a great proof text for the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist, and it's a sacrifice because he talks about altar. Yep. But that's not our topic here, so I'll continue. What's important is the relationship between the bishops, the presbytery, and the deacons. Let's go to the epistle to the Smyrnans, chapter 8. It's not lawful without the bishop either to baptize or to celebrate a love feast, but whoever he shall approve of, that is also pleasing to God, so that everything that is done may be secure and valid. One more, chapter 9 of Smyrnians. He who honors the bishop has been honored by God. He who does anything without the knowledge of the bishop does serve the devil. Pretty harsh words. So you read all these quotes from St. Ignatius in his epistles, subtract his Roman epistle, and the three-tiered ecclesiology is so important. Don't do anything without the bishop. The bishop's in the place of God. The presbyters are in the place of the apostle. So like it's completely important to him.
Right. Don't
do anything without the bishop. So if the Roman Church is disobeying that, he should be furious with the Roman Church. If the Roman Church doesn't even have a bishop, how are they allowed to do anything? But so is he mad at the Roman Church? Well, let's look at the introduction. This is his introduction to his epistle to the Romans. The church which is beloved and enlightened by the will of him that wills all things which are according to the love of Jesus Christ our God, which also presides in the region of the Romans, worthy of God, worthy of honor, worthy of the highest happiness, worthy of praise, worthy of obtaining her every desire, worthy of being deemed holy, and which presides over love in the name of Christ and from the Father. That's in the first part of his epistle to the Romans. Now, you heard those multiple statements from St. Ignatius in those other 6 epistles, where he's saying, you need to follow the bishop. Don't do anything without him. The bishop's in the place of God. Now,
Right.
Rome is not only disobeying the bishop, but doesn't even have a bishop. Why would they be worthy of the highest happiness, worthy of praise, worthy of honor, worthy of et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? I mean, that makes no sense. He's praising this church to the skies, yet the church is in huge disobedience to St. Ignatius's theology. So that is one of the main arguments I have against St. Ignatius. Do you guys have any follow-ups to that before I get to the second one?
Well, no, I just wanted to say that's a good point. So, we started the show, we talked about Peter being in Rome. You went to 1 Peter 5, you went to Clement. That was basically conclusive, if not just convincing evidence. And now we're looking at St. Ignatius of Antioch, his letters, 7 letters. As William mentioned, there's more, but these are the ones that are considered they're considered non-spurious. They're considered, from the pen of Ignatius. And we're looking at how for Ignatius, the threefold order of bishop, presbyters, and deacons is indispensable for the status of a church.
Yeah,
in
for
fact,
his theology, for his view of a church.
For his view of the church, right, it's essential. Like in the Epistle to the Trollians that you were referring to, he even says it in paragraph 3. Without these 3 orders, no church has any right to the name. So that seems pretty conclusive there. William, did you have anything to add before Allan goes to the next argument?
Yeah, I would add that really, really good points there by Allan. To very only briefly supplement, you're very correct in the usage of thusiasterion for altar there in Ignatius. That is very correct. His theology on the actual presence of Christ, the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist, is very, very clear. Another thing that I note. We look at the Ignatius to the Ephesians. He mentions Onesimus, Trollians, Polybius, Smyrnans, Polycarp, of course, Philadelphians. Actually, you don't have anybody named in the Philadelphians. Magnesians, he mentions Damas, but by the very argumentation brought up by certain people within Protestantism, if they want to say, well, we never hear of the Bishop of Rome ever mentioned, well, he also doesn't name the Bishop of the Philadelphians. Another thing that I would point out is we certainly have 7 extant letters of Ignatius, but what if there were more? We don't know if there were more that were maybe lost to time. I know people will say the early fathers, by and large, note that there were 7, but even at that point, when we look at Ignatius to the Philadelphians, we don't have, a bishop listed there. And I've looked at the way Ignatius employs the usage of episcopos, and I find it very significant that his usage is, by and large, when he's talking about in the Magnesians, Smyrnans, Trollians, I might be pronouncing that wrong as well, and Ephesians, he utilizes in the Greek in the singular. But I am very, very, and you might talk about this in your next section, brother. One thing that I've always found very significant is when we examine the 3rd chapter of his to the Ephesians, he tells us bishops settled everywhere, to the utmost bounds of the earth. So we now have him transitioning from the singular to the plural, but we know that he's talking about singular bishops ruling over certain areas. But now he's using episkopoi rather than ha episkopos, telling us they're settled to the utmost bounds of the earth. The Greek use there is parata, from paros, and it literally means the furthest parts of the universe. So then and as you pointed out, you and Eric pointed out, appointed by God, appointed by God. So, I mean, I look at this and I don't see how any of this would support the modern day Protestant idea of a plurality of elders and what have you being a later development. He's using bishops settled all over the world, and the bishops, as he transitions in the Greek to the singular, we know those bishops are singular ruling bishops in their certain regions. So when we look at his usage of episkopos, when he's using it for a singular ruling bishop, I really think that Ignatius fits the Catholic model very, very well. Just your thoughts on that, brother.
Well, and just to comment on that, because of course James White would probably say the College of Presbyters is a college of bishops because bishop was interchangeable with presbyter. But
Sure.
if Saint Ignatius is talking about bishops going to the utmost, what's a bishop to Saint Ignatius? Is it part of a college, or is it a monarch of the diocese?
Exactly.
It's a monarch. So when he talks about them going to the utmost, it's the same things that you get at Ephesus, Magnesia, etc.
He's transitioned from the singular usage, and now he's using the plural. But we know how he utilizes the singular usage of episkopos in the other letters of his, and now he is employing the plural in the Greek for bishops. But as you pointed out, Alan, we've already seen the way he uses it in the singular.
Yeah, there's so much we could go to with Saint Ignatius. I've actually more quotes too, but like I don't want to take the time and beat the dead horse, but essentially he believes in the monarchical bishop. That's the big piece of evidence with Saint Ignatius. Now, so it's like, it makes no sense. Why is he praising the church in Rome if they not only don't have the important key structure, but are not following it, right? So they can't be following a structure they don't have. So there may be a church in Rome, but he would not praise them to the skies.
Right.
But I do want to get into the second argument, because
Yep.
this is kind of a good segue for it, actually.
Please.
And I think you guys may have been familiar with the argument I just made. You know, but there's another argument that I don't know. I kind of came up with this argument on my own and scholars may talk about it. I don't know. I've not read those scholars, but I kind of came up with this on my own. And it's another anomaly between his 6 epistles and the epistle to the Roman Church. Let's, okay. I think, William, if you could just pick your brain for a second. I don't have the epistle in front of me, but his epistle to the Philadelphians, he talks about the bishop, but he doesn't say his name. Am I correct about that?
You are correct.
Okay, yeah. So what you notice, though, here's something I've noticed. If you take a look at those 6 epistles, let's just put Rome to the side for a second. Let me quote you from his epistle to the Magnesians. And I found out that this was actually quoted in Jerry Walls's paper. But of course, he was trying to prove something else. Let me pull up my article here. This article is called "Why Didn't Saint Ignatius Mention the Bishop of Rome?" Okay. Okay, he's writing. Oh, sorry. His epistle to the Ephesians, chapter 2. Since then, I have had the privilege of seeing you through Damas, your most worthy bishop, and through your worthy presbyters Bossus and Apollonius, and throughout my fellow servant, the deacon Sotio, whose friendship may I ever enjoy, inasmuch as he is the subject to the bishop as to the grace of God, and to the presbytery as to the law of Jesus Christ. All right, pause for a second. He mentions the bishop by name, Damas. However, he mentions 2 presbyters, Bossus and Apollonius, and he mentions the deacon Sotio. This is Ephesians chapter 2, Ephesians, Saint Ignatius's epistle.
I think you mean Magnesians, right? Yeah, that would
really?
be Magnesians.
I made a mistake in my article.
Yeah, Damas would be Magnesians.
Oh, my bad.
Ephesians is Onesimus.
Okay. Okay, I mislabeled my quote.
No problem, brother.
In fact, I said Saint Ignatius mentions presbyters and deacons by name.
You know what,
first.
brother? You got it right the first time.
Yeah, but I mislabeled it.
That's okay. We got you. We got you.
We got you, brother.
I'm going to update that article, by the way. And that article you can find on August 19th. So it's not too far after that first one. That was on the 15th. But the point is, Magnesian Church. The point is, he's not only mentioning the bishop, but he's mentioning 2 presbyters by name and 1 deacon. So he's obviously, and if you go to his other letters, he mentions other people in the church. I think that's the only one in Magnesia where he mentions presbyters by name. But in 4 of the churches, he mentions deacons by name. Like, for example, in his epistle to the Ephesians, he mentions Onesimus and Burrus, and he mentions 2 laymen in the church, Euplus and Fronto. So he's mentioning, in fact, I made a chart, you probably can't see it, of who is mentioned in each church. And in most they mention the bishop, and so he's fairly free throwing out names of who's in what church. Now, when you go to Rome, take a guess how many names of the Roman church he mentions. 0. Now, he does mention a guy named Crocus, but Crocus is with him. He's not at the church in Rome.
Yep.
So obviously, his letter to the church in Rome is a very different letter than the other 6. He's not trying to get the house in order. Oh, say hi to this presbyter, this deacon, this layman, say hi to his wife or whatever. In Rome, he doesn't mention a single name. Why? Of course, we can only speculate why at this point. But the church in Rome was probably more in danger, being in the shadow of Mordor there with the pagan emperor, than were these nice, comfortable churches in Asia Minor, far away from the capital of this pagan empire. So, and if the Church of Rome fell, if this epistle to Rome fell into the wrong hands, he'd have the blueprint. He know who all the key people in the Roman church are. And so, yeah, that's something I noticed. And he doesn't even talk about, on top of all that, he doesn't talk about, oh, make sure you do this with the presbyters and the deacons and make sure, none of that. This is his final epistle. He's going to receive his eternal reward. So it's a very different character than the other letters. He doesn't mention the bishop, but he doesn't mention anyone except one guy he's with. So that just shows that when he went to Rome, he didn't mean to address anyone specifically. Was it for safety? Maybe. Like if I had to take a guess, that would be the reason. But I mean, Saint Ignatius is not alive, so we can't ask him. But that would be my guess. So that's a huge anomaly of the bishop of the Epistle to Rome. He doesn't mention the bishop, but he doesn't mention anyone else either. So what do you think of that?
I think you're making a very, very good point there, Allan. And I think you have done, you've done your homework. You've done meticulous work here. And I recommend anybody tuning in, they go and they check your blog out and say, if you have that chart there on your blog, that'd be great, a great help. If you don't, I would definitely recommend maybe trying to get that on there. I know that at times learning visually can be a big help, a really big help. And I know a lot of people would greatly appreciate that. I think you've made very, very good points. And Eric, I don't know if you have anything to contribute to that.
Yeah, I think that's a good argument. One of the things that I gleaned, and I had mentioned this recently in a video that I did for another show, is that, there's good tradition that testifies, and this is coming from Eusebius of Caesarea, is that Peter was in Antioch before he went to Rome. And, so this is something a little bit more on this, it's not as speculative, but it's not as early, people want sources from the immediate first century. But the tradition held that Peter went to Rome first, and when he left, that Peter went to Antioch before he went to Rome, and then he set up Evodius as the bishop of Antioch. And so Peter left Antioch with Evodius ruling the church. Well, Ignatius of Antioch is the successor of Evodius. So the issue here is a corroborative one. How did Ignatius get schooled in this whole idea of the threefold order of the bishop, the presbyter, and the deacon as so sacrosanct is so indispensable to the status of a church? How did Ignatius get schooled in that? If Peter had sort of taught it could be either monarchical, it could be a plurality of elders, what have you, because if Peter goes to Rome and he's an apostle in Rome, he's not going to deliver a tradition of a plurality of elders as an option. If Ignatius is coming out of Antioch with the Antiochian school being so dogmatic on the issue of the monarchical episcopate, it just seems so off kilter for Peter to have been in Antioch, was the bishop of Antioch, or was ruled in Antioch. He was the one who presided over the Antiochian church. Ennodius, his immediate successor, and then Ignatius is the immediate successor of Ennodius or Evodius. Ignatius comes out of the Petrine tradition, is what I'm trying to say. So if Peter makes it to Rome, Peter's not going to deliver a contrary tradition to the Roman church.
That's a great point.
So, I don't know what you would say about that, Alan and William.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Alan. I'll only briefly comment and say I totally agree with you, Eric. That is a really, really good point.
Yeah, no, and I have to admit, I have not thought of that. I've studied a lot of these arguments, but just to piggyback, like Saint Ignatius, there's no way that he would ever talk about any, like, he's concrete about the ecclesiology. There's no way that he would contradict the apostle of an apostle he probably met in person, or if not in person, at least secondhand. And think about it. Like, for example, if you accept the tradition that he was the bishop of Antioch, a monarchical bishop, because this is where Ignatius got his information. He all of a sudden goes to Rome, and he's not the monarchical bishop. He becomes part of a college now.
Right.
Like, yeah,
just doesn't make any sense, especially with the way that Ignatius is so adamant. For him, it's a dogmatic issue. If you don't have a bishop, then not only can you not be called a church, but like you said, Alan, how could you possibly be praised? How could you possibly preside in love over the district of the Romans? If you're not even an ecclesial body in its fullness. The other thing I wanted to say, there was only one thing I also wanted to say before we move on, is that one of the letters, and I was looking for it here, I was hastily trying to find, and maybe William or you can tell me, but there was a point in one of his letters where Ignatius said that God is the bishop of Antioch, where Antioch right now is because he's absent. He wasn't. I'm sure that, I don't know if he was unaware of a successor to his throne in Antioch, but he said that Antioch has God as her bishop now, and I think the allusion is that right at the moment there is no successor until it's confirmed that he dies. Right. Well, if that's true, go ahead, Alan, if you wanted to say something.
Well, it says, I think a quote, I don't think it's the exact quote you're looking for, but I do have it. It says, while your bishop, talking to the Magnesian church, presides in the place of God. So, I mean, the bishop's in the place of God. So if he's absentee temporarily from his see,
right,
like he's in charge, right?
Right. So, but the point that I would make is that would only solidify that for Ignatius, the presbyters don't qualify as the bishop, because if him being absent and you have presbyters in Antioch, well, the presbyters would simply fulfill that role according to the plurality of elders' view. But because he says that God is the bishop there, that means he doesn't think the presbyters are qualified to take that position.
Yeah, because he follows that up by saying the presbyters are in the place of the apostles.
Right.
So that is very, very important. I agree with you totally there, Eric. It's a very important. That, by the way, is chapter 6, I believe.
Right. Right. So go on, Alan. So we got good stuff here. I mean, this is really good, because I wanted this show to be kind of like the go-to show for whenever we get this, because we do get Protestants asking, and obviously with the work of Jerry Walls and the work of in his he wrote a recent article. It's called "If Christ Not Be Risen, If Peter Be Not Pope," which I think also refers to Eamon Duffy, who wrote an article on the early episcopate. But in any case, we want this video to kind of be like a good review of why these arguments are really poor. So go on, take it from there, wherever you wanted to go, Alan.
Well, that's interesting. Just following up, because in Jerry Walls' article, which I assume you guys have read, he talks and in his appearance with Cameron Bertuzzi, because he went on Cameron Bertuzzi's show, and believe it or not, Cameron Bertuzzi, I don't think was too impressed by this argument, but he said that specifically Eamon Duffy. Now I think Eamon Duffy, I think he specializes in like the medieval English church. I don't know how much of an ancient historian he is. And Robert Eno, who is a papal historian, and they're like, well, they agree with Lamp's theory that there's no monarchical bishop. And then he kind of friendly mocked the Catholic Church almost. He's like, well, their apologists have come up with answers. And it's like, how come you're not listening to your scholars, but you're listening to your apologist? Well, first of all, I'm going to quote a modern historian who does believe Peter was the monarchical bishop in Rome, to know that it's not always liberals, and that is Warren H. Carroll. We're going to look at Warren H. Carroll, his book, The Founding of Christendom. If you have a copy, page 405. He's talking about what happened to the apostles. It says, up to this point, they acted together in all things, always under Peter's direct leadership. It is only Peter among the 12 that significant individual actions are recorded using the first 12 years of the history of the church. Now, James, the son of Zebedee, is martyred. James the Just becomes Bishop of Jerusalem. Peter becomes Bishop of Rome. What? Jerry Walls, Jerry Walls, Robert Eno, and Eamon Duffy. How come he's not talking about Warren H. Carroll, the founder of Christendom College, one of the most important Catholic historians in the last century? So, I mean, yes, there are historians who say that, but it's not only one side. So, Jerry Walls, how come you're not listening to your historians? We're just listening to the good ones, But there was something else I wanted to say about. Now, he says, why don't you listen to your scholars instead of your apologists? Well, my question is, does Jerry Walls want us to do that with scripture as well? Like, for example, if he wants us to like pay attention to people like Raymond Brown and Edward Sheila Box and all these people that question believe in the JEPD theory of the Torah, believe that the historical books of the Old Testament are full of errors, that Isaiah had 3 authors, that the book of Daniel was written centuries after it's supposed to have been written.
Right.
Believe in all these fake documents like Q and L and M that no one's ever found.
Right.
And believe that St. Paul didn't write half of the stuff ascribed to him. And not to mention believe that the entire Bible is littered with errors from beginning to end. Does Jerry Walls want us to accept that? Because those are our scholars. Raymond Brown, Raymond Brown in the Academy is the name, right?
Right.
But Raymond Brown thinks all that stuff. So does all the top scholars. Or should we look to more sober-minded stuff?
That's something that's something, and William probably has a lot of experience with this because he's been debating a lot of Protestants. But Jerry Walls in his presentation said that he was trying to make this, this is a knock 'em down, drag 'em out argument against Catholicism, because Eamon Duffy admits that the early church in Rome was plurality of elders, and so does Robert Eno. And he oh yeah, stripping, that's actually a good book. But Jerry Walls, William, was saying that these are Rome's top historians. and my reaction to that, and confirm with me if you agree, is we're in the era of the most flexible allowability in Catholic scholarship. When people try to use Rome's own scholarship, even people on a papal commission, we're at an era right now where you can't refer to, just because they're Catholic, just because they even teach at the Vatican, or that, like Father Robert Eno, nobody was hunting him down. Nobody's hunting Catholic historians down anymore. I just don't think that's very compelling to say, oh, these are Rome's own historians. Well, yeah, this happens to be Rome, the era of the most liberal Roman academics, where Catholics can be all over the map and still be, it reflects poorly on the discipline of the Catholic Church, but it's certain they could be at variance with what Catholics are teaching in their dogmatic formulae and content. What do you think, William?
I totally agree with you, and I think it is a poor argument that they utilize as well, Eric. Why do I think it is a poor argument? Because they know better. Why would you argue against a straw man? I'll give you an example. I've seen it done numerous times where James White will say, well, you know what? I dialogued with, seminarian or what have you, and they told me that Trent is teaching whatever here. Come on. If you know the seminarian is teaching contrary to the faith, why are you even erecting that kind of an argument? It isn't a good argument. That is why when you look at Raymond Brown, it's Raymond Brown, a scholar. We're not arguing, but we don't hearken to Raymond Brown as the end all, perfect guy to go to. In fact, I'd be very careful in recommending people to go to Raymond Brown, because Raymond Brown does not believe that in the historicity of the Gospel of Luke. He's very suspect in a number of issues. I even read a portion in Raymond Brown in The Death of the Messiah, where he says, well, Gospel of John, they shoved the spear in Christ. He must have bled and bled and bled. They abused him. They battered him. But we don't know what caused his death. And,
that's a terrible book, by the way.
It's a terrible book. You've got a number of problematic arguments being levied by them. Not only him, Eric, as you know very well, Allan and Eric, Joseph Fitzmyer. A number of problems in there as well, where in one chapter, you've got him arguing against sola fide, and then in a roundabout manner, in almost a two-faced kind of manner, as well, you've got some fathers that might be talking about it. And he then begins hearkening to a Jansenist forger. So you've got big problems like that when people bring up these liberals, Catholics. I've said it many times. Be ready. If you enter into the realm of apologetics, you are going to be hit with these guys. And at the end of the day, even if you do what Eric and myself are doing, they're going to reply by telling you, well, why hasn't the Pope censored them? Why did they not get hammered down? Why did they not get condemned? And you've got to admit they should have been. They really should have been. So we are in a problematic era right now. Be aware of the good and the bad within the scholarly world.
Amen. Amen. All right, Allan, why don't you take it from there? Well, we have Ignatius. We went through him. We went through your pretty nifty discovery on the names, and we added some more things. What else do you have to say before you want to go on?
Well, before I follow on to the get back to the Apostolic Fathers, I just want to bring out that James White has often debated Shabir Ali, who William has debated against, a very learned Muslim apologist who's read quite a bit of critical scholarship, and he always likes to quote Raymond Brown. Right? He said Raymond Brown. That guy's quoted ad nauseum by Shabir Ali against James White. To prove to argue that Christ was not God in the flesh, to argue that there was no resurrection or questionable stuff like that. However, when James White, if you go, and I got a blog post about this all these years ago, the time that I found James White had a purgatory debate with Father Peter Stravinskas, and I remember this. I spat out my coffee when I heard this. He was quoting Raymond Brown against Father Peter Stravinskas. It's he's talking about First John 5 verses 16 and 17 as a proof of mortal sin versus venial sin. And Raymond Brown, of course, doesn't believe that, right? So he's quoting Raymond. Oh, according to Catholic scholar Raymond Brown. I'm like, what? And then he also quotes Richard McBrien in that same debate. So James White, he doesn't like it when Shabir Ali's quoting these liberal. Shabir quotes Protestant liberals too, James D.G. Dunn, E.P. Sanders. But
the problem there, Allan, as you know very well, Shabir has got to do a better job of reading the people that he quotes.
Yeah,
because he's been using that argument, for instance, from that liberal on the Son of Man for who knows how long. And hey, Shabir, my friend, I busted you on that. And I'm going to hold your feet to the fire for the next 30, 40 years in that.
Yeah, that was a good one. You did a good job in that debate, William. I think Shabir, in my opinion, he did better than he did in the Jay Dyer debate. But I think you did a really good job in that debate.
Sure. Well, the one I'd also add, the one approach that I will argue does better justice to the Christian case is arguing from the Bible and the Fathers rather than merely an only philosophical approach. Shabir Ali was very confounded at a lot of the arguments being thrown at him in his other debate against Dyer. He didn't really have any clue. Yeah, but I didn't see a whole lot of the Bible and a whole lot of the Fathers, because to be quite honest with you, Dyer doesn't know a thing about the Bible or the Fathers. I really don't care if he sees the show and he gets upset. He doesn't know a thing about them. So that is why he relied on philosophy more than anything else.
Yeah. But I mean, to Jay Dyer's credit, I thought it worked fairly well, because I don't think Shabir had seen that kind of approach before.
Correct.
So yeah, because he's used to debating evangelicals who just quote the Bible at him, and he just quotes a liberal to neutralize the passage.
Yeah, almost off the top of his head, he knows. I mean, he knows the stuff. And by the way, for people that may be wondering, Michael will be debating him in about a week on the deity of Christ. People are going to have to tune into that. That'll be a very good debate.
Okay. Yeah, no, I didn't know about that. Like, I know he's talked about his upcoming debate with Shabir Ali, but I didn't know the date exactly. Is it going to be next Saturday?
I think it'll be October 4th, right? Eric, I think.
That sounds right. October 4th does, but I'm not sure. So tune into the next show. We'll confirm for everybody. So, Allan, did you want to go to something further in the Apostolic Fathers? We have Ignatius that we did pretty.
Those are the main arguments that I wanted to give. Of course, I got more quotes by Warren Carroll, but I mean, like, I think I made the point that he supports the view that Peter was the first bishop of Rome, and he's a well-known Catholic historian, founded Christendom College, only died a few years ago, I think. There are some objections that like to be thrown, some minor objections. I think I'll field them.
Okay.
Where's my Epistle of Clement? Okay, yeah. For example, I got there's a few smaller objections. They're not the greatest arguments, but it seems to be okay. In chapter 42 of Clement, it says, "And thus preaching through countries and cities, they appointed the first fruits of their labors, having first proved them by the Spirit, to be bishops and deacons of those who should afterwards believe." Bishops and deacons. Where he continues, "Nor was this anything new, since indeed many ages before it was written concerning bishops and deacons. Thus the scripture says in a certain place, I will appoint their bishops in righteousness and their deacons in faith." Now, anticipated objection. The bishops and the deacons, where's the presbyters, right? Where's the presbyters? Very clever argument, but it's only clever to someone who hasn't read Clement. Because 2 chapters later, he talks about the office of presbyters, distinct from the other 2. Blessed are those presbyters who, having finished their course before now, have obtained a fruitful and perfect departure from this world, for they have no fear lest anyone deprive them of the etc., etc. So, like, he talks about presbyters distinct from those other 2. And in that same chapter, he also talks about the office of the Episcopate in chapter 44. So therefore, presbyter is distinct from episkopos. And so that's one smaller argument that they throw. It's not as potent as the St. Ignatius argument. Then there's one more smaller argument they use from the Shepherd of Hermas.
Right.
Was an early church document in one of the visions, Vision 3, chapter 5. It says, "Here now with regard to the stones which are in the building, those squares, white stones which fitted exactly into each other are apostles," obviously referring to, Peter, Paul, James, and John, "bishops, teachers, and deacons." And then it goes on to talk about the bishops. But what I see here is they've just substituted the word teacher for presbyter. They've interchanged them. We all know what an apostle is. We know what a bishop is. We know what a deacon is. But teachers, I think they're just substituting them for a presbyter here. Because keep in mind, a presbyter does most of the teaching. That's usually been the case throughout church history. Obviously, the bishop and the deacons will help out too. And so that's something that's another smaller objection that they like to bring up. Do you guys have anything to say about those 2 objections?
Go ahead, William.
I by and large, hearing pretty much all of the objections brought up, I've got to be honest with you, Allan. Maybe to the non-observing individual, or maybe to somebody that is relatively new in the faith, they would find them maybe impressive. I don't really find them, very impressive at all. I'm not, I just don't think that the way I weigh things is whether or not something has much substance, and I don't really find much substance in these kind of arguments. So I don't really have much more.
Yeah, like I think the main argument, like their main core argument, is Saint Ignatius, and I think we blow
And when
that out of the water.
you know what, let me kind of toss something else at you, Ellen, maybe, and if you're not aware of it, we can talk about it another time. If you knock down Ignatius, which by the way I think you've done in a very cogent manner, I think you've done a great job of that. What do you reply to another go-to for them would be that in Saint Jerome, you have got Jerome arguing that in the early church there was a plurality and not a singular ruling bishop. Have you looked at that quote? Have you examined it? And what would your thoughts be on it if you have?
Are you talking about his commentary on Galatians?
I'm not sure if it's Galatians or Titus.
Titus 1.
Titus.
Okay. Yes, I'm like, is that the one where he says, because I think there's a couple ones where he brings up from Saint Jerome, right?
Yeah,
there's a few.
There is two places. There is two different ones. I think it's on I think it may be either an epistle and then also his commentary on Titus 1. But Galatians is ringing a bell for me somewhere. So
is it really? I thought it was Titus. I could be wrong.
No, it is Titus. It is.
Okay, gotcha.
I know for sure it's in Titus where he talks about the interchangeability of the term, because that's what Paul does there in Titus 1.
Yeah, I'm trying to find that commentary. I got that commentary in my room somewhere. I just can't find it. But now it's true that well, first of all, I want to employ a double standard here on people who use that argument. If they're bringing 4th and 5th century sources, how are you going to stop Eusebius then? Because Saint Jerome, bless his heart, holy man, was not a historian. He was a theologian, a translator of the scripture, and we honor him for that. But the fact is, if you can bring in Bible translators from the 4th and 5th century, you have no business throwing out Eusebius, the earliest church historian. So it's kind of a double standard there. Second point I want to make, a priest or a presbyter, when it's kind of hard, I do got to admit, to look at passages of scripture, they do seem to be interchangeable. But keep in mind, a presbyter is also a bishop. Like when, like for example, the bishop of my diocese, he's still a priest, but he's just a priest plus, like, he's a bishop. He can ordain other presbyters or priests. So it's quite often used interchangeably. So I mean, they're taking an ambiguity and trying to use it to say more than it actually does. And by the way, if that's true, how come we got the monarchical bishops in Asia Minor, in Magnesia and Ephesus and those places St. Ignatius wrote to? I mean, if St. Ignatius, because keep in mind, Asia Minor, St. Peter was affiliated with there. Again, that's according to later traditions, but if they're quoting St. Jerome, they're accepting later traditions, so so like they take an ambiguity and they try to run with it and make it say more than it actually does.
That's true. I think that's really what it is. And I think it's, it's also a bit of a, I don't want to accuse of bias. Obviously, everybody has a bias, but there's just this tendency in a lot of modern scholars to be predisposed to see later dogmatic church structure as man-made. And even if it was made by the apostles, it would be man-made, but they like to get it past the apostles. So that way it's not really something the apostles taught. And obviously where the Episcopate, which is the plural for bishops, that doesn't necessarily mean there's not one presiding bishop, and this is one of those things that one of the best works on apostolic succession, a historical case, is an old late Anglican scholar. His name is Felix Sirlot. That's the last name is Cirlot. Surlot. He wrote a massive book. It's called Apostolic Succession. Is it true? And it's free. You can actually Google that. You can find it for free. It's on PDF. And he goes through all of the major arguments that he was facing in his own day, which are the same that modern scholarship has today, on this issue where Jerome talks about the interchangeability of presbyter and episcopos, or presbyteros and episcopos. And he does a wonderful job in explaining why it is you could have references to plural, but then there still being a singular head. Like, for example, the church in Rome, one of my arguments for why Ignatius didn't mention one bishop, and this is just a little bit of historiography, but it's speculative, but it still falls within, it's still on the table for historiography. Rome was a big church. I mean, there wasn't just one church, it was a bunch of household churches. And I argue that early Rome was very multi-layered in its organization. So I think that there was probably already one of the first instances of an archbishop with bishops in other house churches within the city.
Like an auxiliary bishop.
Like yes, like an auxiliary bishop, yes. And which at the time probably wouldn't have been called auxiliary, but we can see from Canon 6 in Nicaea 1, they talk about the Alexandrine quasi-patriarch, where the Bishop of Alexandria has special rights over bishops or metropolitans underneath him. And they say, well, such is the custom of Rome. Well, why would they all of a sudden point to Rome? I think it's because Rome had this custom from right in the apostolic times. So if Ignatius knows that, he knows that it's probably going to reach a bunch of different bishops. And maybe that's one of the reasons why he didn't mention one. But it's kind of speculative, but it's, one of the theories I've put out there.
Yeah, that's interesting because you, I think you were actually talking about that on the same episode of Reason and Theology when you're talking. Oh, I'm hearing an echo.
No, I hear you good.
Oh, okay. Like I think you were talking about that when Jay Dyer came on and he did his thing and it turned into a papacy debate and Jay did his thing, then he
got clobbered.
Yeah, he did get clobbered.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, that's one of those issues I think is clear testimony for a complex hierarchical organization at Rome. In any case, I think we've kind of hit that on the head. And Clement, obviously the plurality of the bishops and the deacons as an institution. It's quite possible that the position of a presbyter, the presbyteroi underneath the episcopos in singular, was a development after Clement. And if Clement wrote that, if you could date it way back to the 70s, it may be around a time when you had more of just an episcopal structure of a plurality of bishops in transition. And Felix Surlot has the best arguments for this. In fact, he has a shorter book that you could get. It's like 100 pages. Just look up Felix Surlot in Amazon. It's always out of print. These are some of the best books are out of print right now.
Those books that you talked about in your book recommendations, a lot of them are hard to find. They're like from the 1920s and they're out of print and you got to pay like $100 for them. Yeah,
I'm sorry. I'm terribly sorry. Bookfinder.com sometimes helps, but that's it is what it is. So anyway, before we go to questions from the audience, did you have anything else you wanted to say there, Alan?
One more thing about the Jerry Walls article.
Yeah, go ahead.
he says like he thinks this is like a knockout punch, and he's like, compare the evidence for the resurrection of Christ with, say, the papacy or an early monoepiscopate in Rome. And he says, well, there's more evidence for the resurrection of Christ. And to be honest, I've got no problem admitting that. I mean, they're both part of the Christian faith. And first of all, I think there's a lot of evidence for the early monoepiscopate in Rome. We've talked about it today with scriptures and early traditions, later traditions. But to say, like, that's like saying the resurrection of our Lord Jesus Christ has more evidence than a virgin birth. And of course, I agree with it. And because it's talked about more in the Bible than the virgin birth. The virgin birth is talked about in Matthew and Luke, possibly an allusion in Romans 1, 3, and 4. But there's far more documents of the New Testament that talk about the resurrection of Christ, though I believe in both. And so, yeah, so like for example, if me as a Catholic or Jerry Walls or James White were to make a list of the doctrines they all accept, some are going to have more than others, but you still believe in all of them. And there's more than enough evidence. Like, of course, technically today's session was not on the papacy. It's just proving the monoepiscopate in Rome, which is required for the papacy. We didn't get a chance to get into Matthew 16 or Luke 22 or anything like that. But no, there's certainly sufficient evidence to believe in the papacy and the monoepiscopate in Rome. Just like, yeah, there may be more evidence for the resurrection, but there's certainly enough to believe in the papacy, and certainly enough to believe in doctrines that keep like hypostatic union, Christ having two wills. There's less evidence for that, though I believe in both, and I assume you guys do as well, right? So that's one argument that Jerry Walls made that I wanted to tackle. So, and yeah, I think unless you guys have anything you want to say, I think we could go to audience questions if there's any.
You okay with that, William?
I am great, brother. I know people are very, very they want to really get involved.
Okay, so I've got four main questions here. The first one comes from William Murray. His question, Allan and William, if you want to follow up, is Peter goes to Rome, dies in Rome. How does that automatically mean papacy with successors that are the universal primates of the church?
Well, that's true. And I said a minute ago that the whole idea of the monoepiscopate, Peter being Rome, and the continuing episcopate is not, that's not enough evidence for the papacy. As I mentioned, we didn't get into Matthew 16, and we didn't get into some later evidence. We could go to St. Irenaeus. He gives some evidence. And there's certainly more evidence in the 3rd century, but yeah, we didn't have time to unpack that today. We were focusing more on the monarchical episcopacy, but of course, Eric has, like, for example, in his debate with J. Dyer, which we had mentioned, that started about Canon 6 of Nicaea, and it just kind of evolved. He gives ample evidence in the early church for that. Not that we're dodging, just that's a related topic, but not the specific topic we were handling today. And it's true. There could be, hypothetically, I think I guess both Eastern and Oriental Orthodox churches believe that the papacy had a role. And so they would have believed it had Petrine succession, because it says in the ecumenical councils, which come later, I know. I don't know if this guy's a Protestant or do you know if he's a Protestant? Or is he an Orthodox?
Which one? You mean Jerry Walls?
No,
William Murray? No, William Murray's a Catholic.
Oh, is he? Oh, okay. Yeah, so like at this point, it takes a lot more to explain, and that was not really the topic of today's day. we're just establishing a prerequisite, because we can't have the papacy with no monarchical bishop. So today's one a prerequisite that we need for the papacy. But yes, I concede this alone. We went on about not enough for the papacy itself. We'd have to go to Matthew 16. We'd have to go to some more church fathers, pre-Nicaea, post-Nicaea, etc.
Okay, good. Yeah, I agree. Not sufficient evidence for a papacy. All right, second question comes from ND Irish. His question is Jerry Walls's argument against Catholicism the strongest argument that Protestants have against Catholicism?
Well, probably not the strongest in terms of substance,
right?
But I'll say this: it's not the strongest argument, but it's among the most clever. It's among the most clever because it's something that Catholics aren't prepared for, because most Catholics haven't read Ignatius, Clement, or these other people we're quoting. Most of them have not looked at First Peter and find out what Babylon means. Most Catholics, in fact, you sample your average Catholic in Canada and the States and Poland or Argentina or France or whatever, they probably haven't even read that. They're like, Babylon, that's Iraq, right? You know, but no, it's certainly not the best. It's a clever argument. It's a sleazy argument, but at the end of the day, it's not that good.
Right. Yeah, I would argue that there's plenty of other arguments in the arsenal of Protestants that would be more convincing than that, if there was a chance. Okay, third question comes from Justin the Catholic. What is the formula of Hormizdas?
Okay, this is, and this comes in the 6th century after the Acacian Schism, which it's a formula. I'm not 100% concrete on this, but it's a formula that I think his name was Rusticus.
You talking about Vigilius's nephew?
Yeah, he was a deacon. I think he was the one who basically a formula of submission to Rome that happened in the 6th century. I don't know all the details for this. I think Eric would know it far better than I would.
Yeah. So I think you got it all. I mean, we get it from Rusticus. We get the report of how many signatures were sent into Rome from this formula. But basically, the formula was just a formula of union given to the Eastern emperor at the time. The first one was Emperor Justin. Actually, it was Emperor Anastasius the first, and then it was Emperor Justin, the successor, in order to reconcile the Patriarchate of Constantinople, Alexandria, Antioch, and Jerusalem back into union with the church, because they had basically gone from deleting Chalcedon from the ecumenical list, or they were willing to sort of sideline it for the sake of unity, and Rome wouldn't tolerate that. So Pope Hormizdas, some scholars think that Galatius wrote it up, but it was definitely delivered by Hormizdas in 516 to Constantinople. Initially, Constantinople rejected it, but then under Justin the First, his nephew Justinian, him and his uncle worked hard for the Eastern churches to sign the formula, which basically said that Chalcedon has to be put back on the list of irreformable councils, and Leo's tome has to be put on the same level, and Acacius would have to be cleaned off the diptychs of divine services at in the East.
It,
So
didn't it finally went through around 519, right? Right, Eric?
yeah, 519. Yeah, 519. We have
And correct me if I'm wrong, Eric, because you would know best. Doesn't it does it only endorse the Tome of Leo? I thought it endorsed by and large the majority of what Pope Leo wrote regarding the faith.
yes. In fact, it says Leo. It says the letters of Leo.
There we go.
Yeah.
So it would go beyond his 28th sermon, which I believe is the Tome of Leo.
That's
it would go
correct.
beyond that. Okay.
That's correct. Yeah, that's correct. You're right. Absolutely. It's all of Leo's letters.
Yeah.
And obviously the first four councils, including Chalcedon. And it also includes some other things in there about the papacy itself. But, that it's not as much of the bright and morning star as the issue of Chalcedon was.
Oh, yeah. You're right.
Mm-hmm.
What did you have something you wanted to read there, Alan?
No, I was just checking a reference in the Ecclesiastical History of Evagrius Scholasticus.
Right.
Yeah, I just thought there'd be a reference there, but
we've got a great audience, Alan. We've got guys that will keep you on your toes. I mean, we've got a really astute audience, so they're going to keep you on your toes.
Oh well, bring it on.
Yeah. All right. The next question is from Justin the Catholic. He's wants to know what is invincible ignorance in relationship to salvation in the Catholic Church.
A bit off from the monarchical. The idea of invincible ignorance is kind of the argument that was used against the Feniites back in the 1950s. What does someone need to know in order to be kind of like off the hook, but now of course the big question is how much is invincible ignorance? That's never really been defined. There were some like a few years back, I think in 2012 or 2013, I compiled like from the 1700s to the 1900s all of the statements of a century extra ecclesiam nulla salus.
Right.
And some, now of course these are encyclicals, they're not infallible, but some are very concrete. They lean more toward a Feniite interpretation, and some, particularly Pius IX, are more like for example, I think the Catechism of Pius X, which is a question answer catechism, it says you can no more be saved outside the Catholic Church, just like someone in the days of Noah could not be saved from the flood unless they were in the ark, which prefigures the church. But then in the next question, if you go to the next question, it kind of deals with invincible ignorance. I can't remember the exact wording, but I don't think there's been a definition of invincible ignorance in the church, to my knowledge. Do you want to touch on that, William?
I don't really have much more to add. Definitely only a little bit off topic.
Yeah, only a little, from the first and second century mono-episcopate in Rome to.
We did kind of touch upon this a couple of days ago. I believe we got a very similar question in the audience, and we did go in depth. So maybe if the person didn't quite get fulfilled the way they want, we did touch upon that a few days ago.
Okay, so yeah, I guess check a few shows ago. So.
Yeah. All right, guys. I think that was excellent. We got to some audience questions there. Alan, thank you so much for coming on. Is there anything you want to add in terms of what you're working on? You want to put a plug in for your website or upcoming shows, whatever you want?
I plan on making more YouTube videos. Like I do want to do some more about the Crusades. I do want to focus a lot on church history, because I think church history is important. A lack of knowledge of church history is why this terrible argument has any traction at all. This this non-mono Episcopate in Rome. So it's like I'm going to focus a lot on church history, and I plan on getting a few of those books of your papacy books, obviously some of the cheaper ones, but like I have been doing a lot of reading on history, like I said, of Agrius there, and more YouTube videos, and I keep blogging. I try to blog at least twice a week. There's been times where I've blogged more than that, but no, so just follow me on Twitter at Allan Ruhl. Go to my website, allanruhl.com, spelled like my name. And YouTube, website, Twitter, it's all there. And definitely more videos coming up on church history.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Allan, for coming on. All right, everybody, thank you for joining us this evening. Would you please like, share, and subscribe? And until next time, go and share your faith. Have a good night, everybody.